Passo di Stelvio in the Italian Alps. Realizing a childhood dream, but how and why did we get here? This is the story of a midlife crisis that can be fun. Well, it all started from the beginning. My first recognizable word was kö, which of course meant a car. Then as a bit bigger boy, dreaming or mucking about with old cars. Always either building or driving classic cars. The trip from Finland to Italy itself started with the loading of the Alfa Romeo Spider on a Thursday in July at my friend Joni's house. When we arrived to the harbor, no other classic cars were to be seen.
Jääkö meiltä yhtään osia tuohon? Jääkö meiltä yhtään osia tuohon? Kyllä ne mukana pysyy. No joustava kiinnitys.
When the ship left port, the die was cast, so to speak. We were about to start a trip of more than 3,000 kilometers in a 40-year-old Alfa Romeo. Why go further than to the sea for the fish? After all, there are great roads in Finland as well. Yes, but our roads were paved at such a late stage that the concept of road safety had already been invented. So our asphalt roads are mostly fairly straight and effectively speed limited. Naturally, the familiarity also breeds boredom. And I never saw the Jackal or James Bond driving among the fields of southern Finland. What to do? Well, as an inventive man, I started using the mornings of holidays in the sun for some spirited driving. While the family was still asleep, I took the rental car and set off to drive up the mountain roads as the sun rose. The Canary Islands, for example, offered excellent roads, but unfortunately, the rental car supply was not at the same level. Although a Nissan Micra is a decent shopping trolley, something was missing. The next step was renting a sports car, Mazda MX-5, midsummer in Romania, and the opportunity to drive the famous Transfiguration Road. The road was gorgeous and the car did its job, but something was still missing. The car is too new. When you drive a classic car, the experience comes with all the history related to the car itself, that era, and your own romantic image of the past. It's like you are in your own classic movie. The plan for the next trip was based on renting a suitable classic. We ended up on an uber-romantic trip to the French Alps with an Alfa Giulia Spider. Now everything was perfect. Leisurely cruising, meeting only people smiling at us. Until the brakes failed just after we had climbed to the top of the Col della Bonea. The rental company's reaction to what happened was completely inappropriate, and in the end, I had to wait for weeks to find out whether the rental company was trying to charge the security deposit from my account. Well, one does not give up so easily. New try, a long weekend in Germany, Porsche 356C as a cultural anthropological object, and a castle tour along the romantic Rhine as the route. This time, everything went according to the plan, and the rental company left a reasonable impression. Nevertheless, an essential element of a road trip is freedom. Renting for a few days limits the area of operation and puts on the pressure to drive too much. The logical result was to set off in your own classic car. The chosen classic was an Alfa Romeo Spider. The starting point was pretty rough, but solid project car that I restored, and I thought the finished car looked pretty good. Friday night, and we arrived to Germany.
No niin, roadtrippiä ei pitänyt kuvata, mutta tässähän ollaan. Saksassa mennään, kello on 10 illalla ja ekaa yöpaikkaa lähetään tässä ja
Ei siinä, että tästä se sitten alkaa. Mukava reissu.
The sun goes down and the red moon rises. Tonight's drive is just over 100 kilometers, and the goal is to get to a hotel just south of Hamburg. Waking up on Saturday morning, and it sure looks like Germany. The plan for today is to drive through Germany. The day's drive is about 700 kilometers, so it's off to the Autobahn. Driving through Germany was uneventful and easy, so nothing more about that. We leave the motorways behind us as the Black Forest approaches. That object and avoiding it. Remember that. We will return to that later. The planned highlight of the first driving day, the Black Forest in southern Germany. The roads of the Black Forest are highly praised by Europeans and especially by the English. But I didn't really get them, because Finland is full of similar roads. Arrival at the accommodation and an earned refreshment. Sunday morning, rise and shine. We're set off for France. Smooth, peaceful progress until... You remember that object from yesterday? Now we came across a much smaller one, hit on the sump guard, and the car clearly rises up. If not in the air, then at least up on the suspension. However, everything seems to be working, so we won't stop. Joni says that he didn't warn me about the stone because he thought it would be so obvious that I would evade it. I feel like a moron. The motorway is calling, and soon we are in France. Our destination is Mulhouse, to the museum Site de l'Automobile, i.e. the Schlumpf collection. The navigator commands to the left, but to the right is a parking lot full of classic cars. Well, our car has turning front wheels, so let's go and take a look. We have coincidentally arrived to a local classic car show. The exhibition is of a high standard, and it is a pleasant surprise to see a lot of couples and families. In Finland, classic car events seem to be quite manly affairs. It is also nice to see French cars that you don't see much elsewhere. Then to the museum itself. There is a moving car exhibition going on in the backyard of the museum. It is a rare treat to see a driving exhibition by a 50s racing Ferrari. The museum is certainly worth its reputation. It is the largest car museum in the world, founded by the late brothers Hans and Fritz Schlumpf. Their secret car collection, which they started after the war, got slightly out of hand, to say the least. Mixing their own and the company's money drove the brothers' textile factory, which created their wealth, to bankruptcy, after which the brothers fled to Switzerland. The employees took over the collection and opened it up to the public. In 1978, the museum was declared a historical monument, and later it was nationalized. Gotta love the French madness. Sculptures and racing cars. But of course, Mulhouse has set its sights high, and it is a place worth visiting. However, as rather jaded enthusiasts, we were out of there in an hour and a half. Next to us, Switzerland. Toll and refuel. And we are clearly no longer in Finland. The service concept of the Swiss service stations clearly differs from that of the Finnish ones. Motorways, tunnels, motorways. Until the mountains begin to rise. The games are about to begin. Klausen Pass. This is what we have come here for. We arrived to the accommodation at Andermatt and a well-deserved refreshment. The morning starts right at the beginning of the Susten Pass. Susten is one of the passes called the Andermatt 8. Great thing about classic cars is that the road holding limits come at very reasonable speeds at these winding roads. Therefore, you can enjoy driving here without the fear of speeding fines or of endangering others. The great reputation of this pass is well deserved. Alfa sings. There are other classics on the road as well. The views are spectacular and an open car gives you the full panorama. The descent is now steeper, so more engine braking is needed. The backfiring already observed yesterday has worsened. The root cause of the backfiring must be figured out before it causes any damage to the engine. Timing of the ignition was set in Finland before departure, but due to lack of time, proper test driving and fine-tuning was nowhere near thorough enough. Of course, non-Finnish altitude and temperature also has an effect. Adjustment helped with the backfiring, but the engine has lost almost all torque and we barely get up the mountain. Sports car drivers' sense of humor starts to run low when we get up the Grimsel Pass. Pretty grim indeed. The views are still gorgeous, but the car's problems bring dark clouds over my mood. Self-inflicted problem. All the trust in the car is gone. And even though the famous Futa Pass from the James Bond movie The Goldfinger is already in sight, we decide to skip it, continuing on to Nufenen.
Nyt vähän testi, niin tutkas tulille lähtee.
Before that, however, a more thorough filling of the engine.
Vaihdetta ei tarvitse tapaa. Sitten sammutas pois.
Shit. All that preparation, planning, and the result is the right roads but the sick car that Joni is trying to fix on the road now.
No niin, laitas kääntöön.
The distributor's points cab, ignition timing, carburetor balance, and mixture must be checked and adjusted.
Kokeiles nyt käyntiin. Sammutaan.
Now Joni is doing all this using just his eyes and ears, when normally a feeler gauge, timing lamp, carburetor synchronization tool, and exhaust gas analyzer are needed for these jobs.
Kokeillaan siinä, katsotaan mitä sanoo.
Engine torque has returned, and on the other side of the mountain we are pleased to find out that the backfiring is almost gone. Bravo, Joni! At Nufenen, we have snow. The next day began in an uncertain mood. A strange resonance sound had appeared in the Alfa, and there was a long day of driving ahead. The culmination would be a steep ascent to Stelvio, one of the world's most famous roads. The weather forecast was for an unstable weather in the afternoon, so we skipped the attractive Modena Pass. But we did stop at the observation deck, and soon Asian tourists were all over the Alfa. their enthusiasm was so endearing that I almost didn't hear it when they called the Alfa a Ferrari. Abula Pass had quite light traffic, and there were some other car enthusiasts at the top, albeit with a few decades newer cars. Onwards. The resonation is still a worry. It is difficult to figure out whether it is related to the transmission, steering, brakes, or what. With the Nufenen Pass, the sky opens with rain. Slippery roads, rain, change in the soundscape, and the feeling of claustrophobia due to roof being raised amplify the fears about the resonance, so something needs to be done about it. We arrive in the village and drive into the first workshop. Despite the language barrier, the sympathy value of two Finns driving a classic car is so high that other work is stopped and Alfa is lifted up. We find the cause almost immediately. The sump guard, which I managed to drive it to a rock in the Black Forest, has been so close to the engine that while driving, the oil pan contacts the sump guard intermittently, causing the resonance. Philip and the Italian border is already in sight. When we reach the beginning of the eastern slope of Stelvio, the rain is getting pretty intense. Despite the weather, Stelvio's reputation attracts. We see a convoy of sports cars with big Heelys in front. The road is narrow and we progress from one hairpin to another.
Tässä Stelviota ajetaan ja mutkia on tulossa. Ei ole huomattu vasta 40 menty tällä hetkellä. Ja katsotaan nyt, että pikkasen vettäkin tulee ja Jani tässä veivaa. Taas lähdetään. Nyt tää rupeaa tiheässä. Suomen juuri. Onko hän vetänyt vierainen? Nonni Jani. Stelvio ajettu, miltä nyt tuntuu? Välillä ollaan hengissä.
Kyllä, mutta ei todellakaan. Ei kannata ajaa. Tuota pätkää ainakaan. Niin dramaattinen paikka ehdottomasti, mutta ei niinku ajokokemuksena tuskaa.
Se on hyvä päättää.
The rain has stopped, and the view from the hotel room window to the western slope of Stelvio is like the finest scale electric track in the world. Well, it is a pretty impressive sight. The mandatory social media shot. As the sun was about to set, I had to go and play on that scale electric track. To turning point and on to full throttle. Driving nirvana, where the car, the road, and all those expectations that have accumulated from the mind of a little boy in front of a black and white TV, while looking into a world that felt like another planet to a child still living in a small village in rural Finland. Adulthood and responsibilities, rationality and other excuses. It was not until the fear of the impending death that middle age brought about that the obsession of getting on the right road with the right car took over. This is the road, the car, and the moment. Braking, gear change, corner, throttle, gear. And the road takes over me so that I don't even notice that I've already passed the hotel. new morning and moving on. The western slope of Stelvio also has hairpins, but the flow is smoother than on the other side. Next is Passo di Gavia. Warnings about the poor condition of Italian mountain roads seem to be true. Not good news, as the replacement of the spring plates of the front suspension before the trip lowered the front significantly. The mechanic apparently left out the spacers. The lowered ground clearance did not seem so bad in Finland. In fact, it looked pretty cool, with one person on board and an empty trunk. Now we have a fully loaded car combined with the Italian roads. An awkward combination. Awkward meaning that when driving you have to focus constantly on whether you are in danger of grounding and adjusting your driving line or preparing to slow down in order to avoid grounding. And sometimes you get it wrong. The road is clearly popular with motorcyclists, and in terms of width, it is more suitable for them. On the memorial of the Battle of San Matteo, we can spare a thought back to 100 years ago for the commander of the Italian mountain battalion, who, after successfully conquering the outpost, died as a victim of the artillery barrage of his own side. Maybe there are better roads on the other side of the mountain. Those Mazda MX-5s at least have a more suitable suspension for this road. This does not look promising. The views of the unpaved road are quite dramatic, especially for the co-pilot traveling on the side of the deeper ditch. Well, the roads have not improved and the speed is already dropping so much that it is better to let the cyclist pass. The road keeps getting narrower and narrower, and you never know what is waiting behind the corner. After Passo di Gavia, we were supposed to go over the mountains towards Lake Garda. But since, according to the map, there would have been even a smaller road ahead, we decided to proceed along normal Italian two-lane roads. We soon realized that the Italian roads are a little bit different from what we are used in Finland. Great winding road, though the front suspension was grounding at times while driving at 80 km per hour. Arrival and a reminder about the ground clearance that we were playing with. Highly deserved refreshment. And another. The driving day had been so intense that I did not even wake up during the nighttime thunderstorm. The next morning we dive onto the autostrada among the trucks and head towards the Modena Supercar Valley and its car museums. The level of the museum tour was dizzying. The atmosphere ranged from the market craziness of the Maranello Ferrari Museum through the brand altar of the Enzo Ferrari Museum in Modena and Hollywood tribute of Lamborghini to the almost religious experience of the Collezione Umberto Panini's private Maserati Museum. Then comes the end of Joni's and my trip, towards Bologna Airport and for a change of the co-driver. My next travel companion would be more charming, but not nearly as good of a mechanic as Joni.
Terveisiä sateista Italiasta. Kyllä. Täällä on lämmintä ja sateista. 2300 on tällä hetkellä suunnilleen tultu ja meikäläinen jää nyt reissusta pois. Jani jatkaa.
So far, it has been a car enthusiast trip. Now the nature of the journey is changing. It is time for leisurely cruising with Tanya in the countryside of Tuscany and Emilia-Romagna. Admittedly, the transition to the leisurely phase will be made through the Futa and Raticossa passes that were part of the famous Mille Miglia race. In Italy, even the rooster wakes up at a blight time. From the very beginning of Futa, you realize that something has changed. The road is almost racetrack smooth. It is also popular with racetrack-minded motorcyclists. Even though motorcyclists move at a different pace, there is room for everyone. However, there is always an exception to the rule. Well, he seems to have his own ambulance on duty for the inevitable outcome. At Raticossa, the surface gets a little rougher, but it is a good sequel to Futa on the way to Florence and then to Arezzo. In Arezzo, we move to a new pace to admire the more urban Italy. From Arezzo, the journey continues into the countryside, and the car gives you the freedom to explore Italy from outside the tourist attractions. There is an obvious contradiction between high-speed driving with an open car and the brimmed hat that protects Tanya from burning. It is solved by leaving the motorway and taking an extemporary shortcut over the mountains towards Bobbio. The navigator calculates the route and it estimates a pretty slow average speed. Well, I'm sure that we can easily beat the navigator's pessimistic average speed of 27 kilometers per hour. Quite soon I started to wonder as to whether this was a good idea after all. Well, I'm sure the road will get better. The pattern familiar from the Passo di Gavia makes a comeback. First, hyper-concentrated pothole avoidance, then wishful thinking after each smoothed bit, and finally a disappointment. Having already driven on the Stone Age potato field for an hour, a sign of a bumpy road ahead does not evoke any positive thoughts. The day begins to turn into evening, and we are still progressing at snail's pace. No signs of human habitation, and the condition of the road is not improving. Getting narrower, for sure. But it does have its moments. A hawk joins us. We fly in formation for quite a while. And as the peak approaches, the views begin to open up. Humans! A tractor! Admittedly, now we seem to be in such a backwoods that the smiling reactions we've had so far in the Alpha have changed to "What are those yuppies doing here?" faces. The journey continues and the road worsens. Then, in the middle of nowhere, a statue bathing in light of the setting sun. Somehow an absurd sight. Onwards. Our express time pressure comes from the kickoff of the World Cup football and the desire to get out of these roads before dark. The unspoken time pressure comes from an internal monologue which has convinced me that if I won't get us out of this mess soon, this will be our last car trip together. Until suddenly we reach another peak.
No niin, miltä tuntuu olla kärsivällisyyden Suomen mestaruuskilpailuiden voittaja?
Ollaan voittajia. Ollaan voittajia.
The light from the sky illuminates the village that is our destination. It turns out that Tanya has not experienced our journey like me. In fact, she has quite enjoyed the opportunity to get to see the exceptional scenery of the beaten track. The journey continues as we race towards the setting sun. The speed increases, partly to the improvement of the road, and partly to the bloodthirst brought about by the proximity of the finish line. The highway feels like victory, and we made it in time to see the opening kick. Alfa comes into my dreams. Over 40-year-old car and 6 hours of driving over 2 mountains and endless potholes, and not the slightest complaint. New day and arrival to Bergamo. A quick visit to a barbershop stretched into a long car chat and a promise to come and show the car before leaving to Brescia. I can assure you that a Finnish couple who have driven from Finland to Italy in a red classic Alfa feel quite welcome, especially when one of them speaks the local language.
Sun pitää ehkä nousta. Mä nousenko minä? Ciao. Faccio un video su di voi, spero che va bene.
Long trip, but
Allora ha deciso cosa fare?
Sì, lui va secondo il piano, andiamo lì e vediamo come
Dammi un suo biglietto.
Onko sulla käyntikortti?
ei ole, mutta mulla on hänen tiedot, joten mä oon hänen yhteyksissä vielä.
Però lui ha i tuoi contatti e ci chiamiamo o veniamo a trovarti.
Ah, ok. No, se io gli compro la Maserati, compro io.
Ciao.
No niin, sit jatketaan.
Change of shirt and of the Brescia. I had agreed with a Brescian classic car dealer that either my Alfa would go into a consignment sale for them or they would buy it directly. Even a direct sale to a dealer would make economic sense for me, as do Italy's tax legislation. Spiders with 2-liter engines are rare and valuable over here. If there is no direct sale, then by leaving it for a consignment, I get an affordable storage place for the car, and if no one buys it, a base camp for the next adventure. In any case, I avoid the dullest part of all trips, the return trip. The finish line.
Alfa Pass hengissä ainakin, mutta katsotaan miten sitä loppuhommashow menee.
Oh, very good.
But now, next week, Monday, you figure out about the direct buying.
Yes.
You check the car and you check the process over here. I'll be in Finland and I can do whatever needs to be done from there.
I don't need the original documents. Would be enough having a copy of the logbook.
I can send it to you on Monday.
And
Sitten.
Perhaps the last glance, and towards Bergamo, now without the Alfa. A small celebration with a refreshment and a cigar. It worked. Great trip in great company. Admittedly, the beginning was a bit shaky. Inadequate shakedown in Finland transferred the fine-tuning to the Swiss Alps. Later it turned out that doing business with Luzago did not prove to be without its problems. But in the end, Alfa got a new home in Italy. However, an adventure has to have a dramatic arc, with adversity and a touch of remorse and a redemption. Speaking of the peaks, I will never forget the evening ascent at Stelvio. The merging of sound, the touch, the history, my own, the cars, and the road into that moment. The adventure itself is a luxury, for which there is very little room in the life of a middle-aged civil servant. Nevertheless, an adventure this was, and is for sure that this won't be the last one. Come to think of it, I've got a couple ideas.